Now this slide and the next slide are really to demonstrate what is happening to the way products move through to the consumer. One of them is the traditional and still used for the most part supply chain. And this slide is a good example of a beef supply chain, although all supply chains work pretty well the same. At the very beginning here we have the sort of the birth of the product, whether it's the birth of a live animal or a field plant of some kind. It starts off here and it moves next to some, it could be a feedlot next, in this case, and then it moves from there. And when I say moves, if you look down the right-hand side of the chain, transportation is a huge piece of both supply and value chain. The supply chain moves along and then you get up into the processing, which might be as minimal as sort of cutting and wrapping. It might be all kinds of secondary processing and manufacturing into packaged goods, pet products, whatever it happens to be. Then you go through a wholesale warehouse stage and then into either retail, some form of retail, or to the food service side. Now obviously if you're a farmer's marketer, you don't have all of those. You really only have two steps. I guess you have three. You have a production step, a transportation step, and a final sale to the consumer right here at the bottom. Now, one of the big flaws in this day and age, when consumers are so educated and so empowered to make good decisions in their own best interest, the supply chain really is struggling to meet those kind of requirements, and here's why. The supply chain is built on price transaction, and it starts, as you all well know, it starts at either the retail or the food service side of things. When the produce manager at Save-On Foods says to you, if we can't buy them from you for 80 cents a pound, that's no deal. We got to have 80 cents a pound. And what happens, I don't think we have any sort of those types of retailers with us today, but those retailers are operating in their own best interest too, and they have to maintain what is a fairly narrow margin in their business. And their net margin is very, very low. Of course, their volume is very, very high. So although Loblaws is only making a couple of % net profit, it's hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in net profit, probably hundreds of millions. Not true for most of us. If you're only producing $100,000 worth of volume of revenue, it's a different story altogether, isn't it? So the price gets set in a way right here at the top of the chain, and then of course the transaction phenomena carries backwards through the chain where the wholesaler, it could be any of Gordon Food Services or any of this food, Cisco, people we see in this province, saying to the next step down the line, we've got to have this we've got to pick this up from you for 60 cents a pound. And of course it gets sort of dehydrated all the way back to the producer, who, as we said before, quote unquote, gets what's left. The producer doesn't really have any pricing power, the ability to set their own prices, especially in a commodity area. So that's what the supply chain is all about. Now let's contrast that with the ever-growing model. I guess it's a kind of a marketing / business model that is focused on the consumer this time, down here at the very end. I'll give you an example of how it could work. The consumer usually, through their behavior, communicate with the food service operation or the retailer what their preferences are. And that happens in a lot of different ways. People start buying more of this and buying less of that. Retailers and food service people talk to their consumers a lot and gather market intelligence. And the example could be the consumer is starting to demand smaller sized packages. And that, in fact, is happening as the baby boom generation moves through, I guess, the leading age of the baby boom generation is now into they're retiring. I guess some of them are 65, 66 now. So as more of that information we need smaller packages, that has to go backwards down the chain, and it has to get to where the changes have to be made. And those changes would first probably be made here at the processing manufacturing level in here. And also probably at the cut and wrap stage and so on. Can you imagine in a supply chain where the communication and the rapport between links is strictly transactional? In fact, it sounds like this. How come you haven't paid my invoice yet? Well, your check bounced. You know, those kinds of discussions, those kinds of communication, all based on price transaction. What's your lowest price? Well, forget it then. In a value chain, because of the way the chain is constructed and the way the partners agree to collaborate with each other, the information on what's needed to be changed flows back down to the point where the changes have to be made. And the changes are made voluntarily because the links, the people that are participating in the value chain, have agreed ahead of time to work as a team. So the discussions, the communications, the rapport is totally different than it is in a supply chain. Now, you know, don't get me wrong, not all supply chains are sort of that black and white I just described. Some of them are very friendly. The shorter ones are friendlier, of course. The smaller the distribution spread, the friendlier and easier they are. So there are degrees of difficulty. Whereas value chains start with a different business model, that kind of team, we're all in this together. They're spreading the risk, and they're spreading also in most cases, they're spreading the gains. So the change gets made where the expertise is, first of all, and then the pricing information, the pricing and costing information then flows back up the line from link to link, and of course sometimes it can skip various links that don't need to know, although value chains meet on a fairly regular basis and can communicate online particularly now. So they all know what's going on when, and listen to this carefully, they all know what's going on when there is a required change in a product to satisfy a shift or a shift in a customer preference or a new customer need or want in the marketplace. Very, very focused on the end user and the customer. So the upshot of these value chains is that instead of the lower links taking whatever they can get, whatever is offered to them by way of the lowest price, there is more of again, a collaborative price and cost setting discussion that takes place. And it kind of manifests itself in contracts where producers are contracted through the chain to produce X volume at X price for the next year, or the next 2 years or 3 years, depending on what the product is. And it puts a lot of certainty into the food business that really isn't there for people that are working in a commodity price, low price driven arena. So I wanted you to see these models that are available, because there's a lot of will now for startups to get involved in some sort of a value chain relationship. And it could be just two of you to start off with that work together in a chain. And then it grows from there. And again, depending on, and you'll see, we're going to talk about distribution systems here in a minute. And the wider the distribution of your product, the wider your chain is going to be, the longer your chain is going to be. So again, to impress upon you the importance of customer-focused operations. Does anybody have any questions on those two slides, the supply chain, value chain? Well, there's always somebody, it seems, that will do the low price. If you won't do it, the next guy will. That seems to be the reality of the situation. You know, in the food business, you can't put it back into inventory in a lot of cases and wait out the pricing dips. You have to move it. And that's one of the reasons why food marketing is so different than anything else. It doesn't seem to work because we work in a free enterprise economy, and if suddenly the co-op or the value chain ranchers that you're talking about decide that they're not going to go under this particular price, the people, even in the value chain sometimes, they can go to Alberta and get it. So again, this is a marketing-centric business model, okay? And it puts more power into the hands of the people at the beginning of the chain. And it goes without saying, I thought this gentleman in front of me was going to talk about who has the pricing power. And of course, in a supply chain, it's usually the retailer or the food service operator who has the pricing power. They determine where things start, and then you subtract from there the various discounts as we go back towards the beginning of the chain.